everybody. I am Dr. Alexandra Mayer, and if you are new to my channel, welcome. We're super excited that you're here, and if you've been watching our videos every single week, thank you. We appreciate it. Today we have an awesome topic, and the reason why I say that is because this is a topic that I feel like people get wrong a lot. Or they go into other offices and they feel like they haven't got a complete workup for this topic, and that is thyroid. Today we're going into everything thyroid. This is something that I see in my office a lot, where patients come in with labs and they're either really just not run very comprehensively, or something has been missed. So it's a great topic. But before we jump in, if you guys like the content that we're putting out, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and drop us a comment. It helps us a ton to get our videos out there to more women like you. So without further ado, let's jump into thyroid. So let's start by talking about kind of what the thyroid gland is, right? So the thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland that's here kind of in the base of the neck, and it is your master of metabolism. It's your master of metabolism, and it's your regulator for anything thermogenic, so like heat creation in the body. But the most important thing to think about with thyroid is that basically almost all of your cells have some sort of thyroid receptor and some sort of thyroid receptors on them. So it really does impact so many different things in the body, and a lot of things that women don't think about. So let's run through some symptoms of thyroid. Like, when should you think about getting your thyroid run? So first of all, the first symptom we're going to talk about is if you're always hot or always cold, right? So if you're the person where everybody else has, like, you know, normal clothes on and you're putting on a blanket, or where you can't stand anything cold, any drafts, anything like that, that's something to consider with thyroid. And then the other direction, right? So if you're always hot when everybody else around you is cold, that's definitely something to think about. That means that your thermogenesis is probably not functioning super duper well. So that's the first kind of sign and symptom of thyroid. The next sign and symptom of thyroid that we think about is dry skin. So dry skin is a super common thyroid symptom. Now, I'm not talking about like Arizona, right, where I live, dry skin, right? I'm talking about the kind of dry skin where your skin is dry and cracked, where you need to put on moisturizer, your skin is still dry, and you are well hydrated and you're still experiencing this. That's normally on the case of hypothyroidism, right? If you're hyperthyroid, so if your thyroid is too much, then you may run into the issue of having thin skin, where your skin is just really thin and frail. Okay, so that's symptom number 2. Symptom number 3 is one that most women walk in with, right, when they think about whether if their thyroid is not working very well, and that's going to be changes in weight, right? So if you're hypothyroid, meaning that you do not make enough thyroid hormone from your thyroid itself, then you usually will have a sluggish metabolism, right? So a little bit more difficulty losing weight, even if you're dieting and exercising and doing the right things, right? Metabolism can still be a little bit slow, and that weight can be really hard to get off. On the other side of things, right, if you're hyperthyroid, so if you have too much thyroid, despite usually having a really voracious appetite, you will still lose weight. And the weight loss is unexplainable, and you can't gain it to kind of save your life. So those are major symptoms of thyroid, something that women do think about a lot when they first come in. The next one is changes in GI. So because your thyroid is your master of metabolism, right? As metabolism slows, the GI tract also tends to slow, right? So peristalsis, the way that we move food through our GI tract and out, tends to slow, which means that hypothyroidism, or too little thyroid hormone, can be a major contributing factor to constipation. So constipation on one side of the spectrum for hypothyroid patients, or on the other side of the spectrum, way more frequent bowel movements. Sometimes they can be a little bit looser, a little bit less well formed, but more frequent. Those are major signs and symptoms of thyroid. The next one that we think about is hair loss. Hair loss, which we've talked about in many different videos at this point. Hypothyroidism is one of the things that we think about. So with thyroid, we usually see a change in the texture of the hair, and it does differ depending, because you can get hair loss with both hypo and hyperthyroidism. So with hypothyroidism, your hair tends to be a little coarser, and it tends to actually fall out a lot more. You have a lot more shed. Versus with hyperthyroidism, your hair tends to be thinner and more brittle, and then you can experience some hair loss as well. Another kind of telltale sign for thyroid is you'll notice that a lot of people lose the lateral third of their eyebrows, right? So they'll have nice normal eyebrows, and when their thyroid goes off, their eyebrows will start receding. And as you look at people, you can kind of see that, right? It usually does come with a little bit more puffiness around the eye area. And that can be a telltale sign that your thyroid is hypofunctioning, so that you're not creating enough thyroid hormone. On top of that, kind of general swelling and sometimes even changes in nerve function can both be related to hypothyroidism as well. The next sign and symptom that I want to talk about is a big one. I see this a lot in my practice, and it's one that I think people don't understand very well, and that is changes in mood. So with hypothyroid and hyperthyroid, you can get major changes in mood. Normally, people talk about depression with hypothyroid, right? So your mood just tends to be a little bit lower than maybe it once was, and this can be a major contributing factor. However, in my practice, I have seen a lot of anxiety patients, their main contributor to their anxiety be hypothyroidism, so not having enough thyroid hormone. And then on the other side of the spectrum, right, if your thyroid is hyper-functioning, so if you have too much thyroid, you can end up with anxiety and a little bit more like agitation, right? But I think that is a common misconception, that patients think that if you have anxiety, you must just have too much thyroid hormone. Doesn't necessarily work like that. I see it a lot in hypothyroid patients. And then finally, the last one that I want to talk about is so important, and that is changes in your cycle or your period. A lot of people don't know that thyroid and your female hormones play a big role together, right? In medicine, we like to do this like weird thing where we segment out your hormones and different people see different sides of your hormones. But it doesn't necessarily work like that. So one of the things that we know is that T4, which is kind of the main hormone that your thyroid actually creates, we're gonna talk about in a second, but T4 tends to mirror progesterone in the body. And progesterone, if you remember from the video that we did on progesterone, which we'll link here, progesterone is a main hormone that happens when you ovulate, right? So oftentimes with changes in the cycle, so amenorrhea, which is loss of a cycle where you're not having a period, right? Or even frequent menstruation where you're having a period too much, or changes in the heaviness of the cycle or kind of the symptoms surrounding the cycle. Oftentimes thyroid will be actually one of the first stops we take in our algorithm of figuring out what's wrong with you. A lot of women don't realize that. Thyroid is a huge contributor, and it's one of the first things you should look at if your cycle has changed a lot. Or if you're not getting a cycle, go get your thyroid run. Now you might be thinking, well, I've done all this, right? I've gone into my doctor, I have all these symptoms, this sounds just like me, but I've never gotten a diagnosis. So now I want to talk about how do we properly run a thyroid panel. This is something that I'm really excited to talk about to my patients because it is something that like I said at the beginning of the video, I just don't see done very well. So normally, if patients wander into my office with pre-done labs, right? So a lot of times patients will come in and they'll say, I already got my labs run, like let's just use those labs. Most of the time for thyroid, the only thing that I'm seeing is thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. So TSH is a marker of thyroid health. And what it is it's a stimulating hormone. It comes from your brain and it says to your thyroid, hey, we need you to make some hormone, right? So ideally, we want TSH to be about 1 to 1.5. And if TSH starts to rise, what that's telling us is that your brain is constantly having to say to the thyroid, hey, can you please do your job, right? Like, I've asked you again, please do your job. And so that means your thyroid usually is not functioning super well, not creating as much hormone as we would expect, because the brain is constantly reading the amount of hormone you have in your body and then shutting off your signaling based on those normal hormones. If you have normal amounts of thyroid, your TSH will eventually shut off because it doesn't need anymore, right? It's a negative feedback loop, and the body is really smart and it knows exactly how much it needs, and so it will signal that. So most of the time, TSH is the only thing I see run. And if it's in the reference range, which goes from 0.45 or 0.5 about to 4.5 or 5, depending on the lab, you will get you're good, everything's fine. And oftentimes, right, if TSH is elevated, even within the reference range, a above that 1 to 1.5 or 1 to 2, it is something to consider. The next thing we want to run though is we want to see what the actual thyroid is doing. And so when we want to see what the actual thyroid is doing, we want to run a free T4 and a free T3. And you'll notice I said free on both of those, not total. Total is not helpful for us in running a thyroid panel, or it's quite unhelpful, I would say. So you want your free hormones. You want free hormones in the body are free and available and ready to do the work. And we want to know that what we're running is going to be available to actually make us feel better. So when we're thinking about the thyroid, the brain signals the thyroid and the thyroid makes mostly T4. Then it takes that T4 into the peripheral tissue, so into the liver and into the muscles, and it converts it into free T3. Free T3 is more active and more biologically available. That's why you need to run both of these hormones together, because it's not just about how much T4 you're making, it's also about can you actually convert it into the active form. And that conversion into the active form is really dependent on a bunch of different nutrients. It's dependent on, for example, selenium. If you don't have enough selenium, you will not convert your thyroid properly, in which case you can have symptoms of hypothyroidism without any CNS, like brain thyroid connection changes, right? So TSH doesn't necessarily change dramatically enough to warrant being hypothyroid, but you're still having symptoms. So those are two things. The next thing we want to run is a reverse T3. So reverse T3 is the exact same molecular structure as T3, except it's inactive. What this means is that it uses the same receptor sites, right? So what happens is your receptors on your cell are like lock and key. And so I use this analogy a lot with my patients where I say, okay, what if we both go up to a house and you have a key and I have a key, and my key fits in the door but won't turn, and your key will turn and get us into the house. If I get there first and I put my key in and I don't remove it, it doesn't matter that you have a key, because you're not getting in. And that's exactly what happens at a cellular level. If reverse T3 is too high, or if it's out of range, out of balance with T3, with free T3, right, which is why you have to run both of those together, you will experience symptoms of hypothyroidism at a cellular level, because your cells can't use the hormone because the receptor sites are being blocked up, right? So free T3 and reverse T3 are both really important. You have to run them together. They really don't give you any information if you don't have the other one. The next thing we want to run is antibodies. So the number of patients that walk into my office that have underlying autoimmune thyroid issues that have not been diagnosed is very high. And what's important to think about with things like Hashimoto's, for example, right, or an autoimmune hypothyroidism, is that with Hashimoto's, oftentimes you can be euthyroid, which is normal thyroid, before you go hypothyroid. And sometimes you can even be hyperthyroid, then euthyroid, then hypothyroid. So there is this kind of mixture of things that happens with autoimmune thyroid that we need to look at. So conventionally, I feel like this is missed a lot, and I feel like it's missed a lot because we think, okay, there's nothing we can really do about the antibody situation, so we just wait until you're bad enough to medicate you, right? Wait until your TSH is above 5 so we can medicate you, and until then, just suffer. So that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of things that we can do. So with autoimmune hypothyroidism, for example, right, there is this thing called molecular mimicry where we've recognized that gluten sensitivity tends to play a role with Hashimoto's or autoimmune hypothyroidism. And that's because there's a little bit of this molecular mimicry where the body is seeing the gluten similarly to the way it sees the cells of the thyroid, and it's attacking both of them, right? So removing gluten can be helpful if that is your sensitivity, right? I really like doing sensitivity testing to see. So there's that. There's some really good research on low-dose naltrexone, which I talked a lot about in my autoimmune lecture here with Dr. Leslie Axelrod, so that would be a good one to watch. There is research on low-dose naltrexone. There's some research on things like plant phytosterols helping with autoimmunity and hypothyroidism. So there are things you can do to help with the antibodies that isn't necessarily just waiting until your thyroid's bad enough to medicate. So if we're going to test for autoimmune hypothyroidism, what are we testing, right? Well, first of all, you want to run thyroid peroxidase antibodies, or TPO antibodies. TPO antibodies are a huge antibody that's elevated in Hashimoto's or autoimmune hypothyroidism. Okay. The other one we want to think about for autoimmune hypothyroidism are anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. And then if we're looking on the hyperthyroidism side, right, that would be something like Graves' disease. And with Graves' disease, what you want to run is a thyroid stimulating antibody and anti-thyrotropic receptor antibody. So all of those antibodies are going to tell us, is there an underlying autoimmune condition happening that we need to be working on treating, right? And then what if all of that comes back normal, right? What if all of that comes back normal? So if you're looking at your labs and your doctor says that both your TSH is kind of low normal, right? So it's not elevated, but your free T4 is also low normal or not elevated, and you're not over medicated with T3 because that can cause that. Then sometimes what you want to look at is this a metabolic downshift? Like, is your body trying to downshift your metabolism for a reason, right? So what would these reasons be? Under eating and over exercising are two of kind of the most common reasons, right? Your body is trying to protect you. So if you're not giving it enough fuel, or you're giving it like just enough fuel and then you're using up way more than you give it, then your body is going to shift down your metabolism because it can't sustain it, right? And its job is to keep you alive. So I see that a lot in patients where their TSH is actually really, really normal and really ideal, but their T4 is really low, or lower than I would like it to be, because I would like T4 to be above 1.5 ideally. So when we're looking at that, that would tell me that there's probably a metabolic downshift and we need to work on maybe reverse dieting. So I see that a lot with patients, really help their thyroid, really help their GI symptoms like constipation, and really help get them moving in like a metabolically sound way so that they can feel better. And we have an entire video on that with Kelly Michelle with Keep Moving Forward, who is fantastic at reverse dieting women. Finally, my little bonus tip, right? If you are looking at a thyroid panel, you've had good thyroid labs run, somebody is in the office has talked to you about what their optimal ideal values are, right? So you don't want somebody just looking at, for example, TSH and saying, well, you're not a 5, so too bad, right? You want somebody saying, hey, ideally, I would like this to be 1 to 1.5, right? Ideally, I would like free T4 to be above 1.5. Ideally, I would like your free T3 to reverse T3 ratio to be above 0.2, right? You want somebody to be talking about those. So let's say you got that. You got a great thyroid panel. Somebody's talking to you about optimal values, and you're still not getting answers, right? My bonus tip for you is to run cortisol. Cortisol, although there isn't necessarily a direct like thyroid creates cortisol or something like that, cortisol is necessary for using thyroid at a cellular level. And a lot of the time what you'll find is that if doctors too quickly medicate the thyroid and aren't getting results, usually you have to back up and you have to treat the cortisol. You have to treat that HPA axis. So we do have a video on that as well, on how to run cortisol, on things to think about with running cortisol. But this would be a really good time to do, for example, like a saliva test where we're testing cortisol multiple times throughout the day, or dry urine test to test cortisol multiple times throughout the day, so we can get that curve and really see what's going on. Because oftentimes if you don't have enough cortisol, you can have thyroid-like symptoms without the thyroid being the actual cause or concern. So that was a lot of information. What questions do you guys have? And I want to know if you guys have been struggling with feeling like you have symptoms of thyroid but without getting answers. And if you're looking at your labs thinking, wow, like we did a great job, or if you're thinking, hey, maybe my labs need redone. So drop us a comment below and let us know what you think. And then if you like our content, please go ahead, like, subscribe, share it with a friend. All of those things really help us, and we will see you next week for our next video.